super fun, and all about artisan cheese and more to melt your peaceful heart and toast your peaceful life. Coming to you from the Appalachian Mountains of southwestern Virginia, this is the Peaceful Heart FarmCast.
Hey, this is Scott Hall from Peaceful Heart Farm, and you are listening to the Peaceful Heart FarmCast.
Hello, everybody. Melanie Hall here. Hope you are doing very, very well. The conversation today and every day revolves around the value of traditional homestead living, traditional raw milk products, and artisan cheese. Topics discussed here are designed to create new perspectives and possibilities for how you might add the taste of tradition to your life. Raising animal protein for food on the homestead. What are some of the options? And what are some of the factors to consider when making your choices? As you may know, our choices for raising animal protein on the homestead currently include cows, goats, sheep, and poultry. In the very near future, we plan on having pigs. And there are other types of protein that we may have or have considered. And I'll talk about those. So our homestead is always evolving. And yours is going to be your unique set of animals as well. But at first, as always, I will never take you all for granted. You make this show possible. And I want to say welcome to any and all new listeners, and welcome back to the veteran homestead-loving regulars who stop by the FarmCast for every episode. You mean so much to me. Thank you so much for your support of this podcast. It has been a while, and I am really excited to share with you all about the homestead. We've had a busy morning already. Scott is milking. I set up for making butter a little bit later, around noonish or so. I'll be making butter. And then I put some yogurt on to ferment. I got that ready. That takes about, actually to get it ready only takes about 10 minutes, but you got to heat the milk up. It takes about an hour. And then it's going to be ready in less than 8 hours. I've been out to the garden. I've planted a half a dozen flowers, stalks this time, and I let the chickens out to play and checked on their food and water and all of that. Chickens, you say? When did that happen? If I remember correctly, the eggs began hatching on around April the 8th, I believe, and I had 24 eggs each of American white breast and black copper Moran. So basically a total of 48 eggs. There were 2 incubators running, and all went well. I hatched 17 of the white American breast eggs and 7 black copper Morans. And due to that low hatch rate on the Morans, the eBay seller sent me another dozen for the cost of postage. So I incubated those, and I hatched 3 more of the black copper Moran from that batch. And both of those are really low hatch rates. And the first wasn't my fault. Most of those eggs were not fertile, or maybe they got scrambled in the shipping process. But I must say that those that didn't hatch in that last dozen, 4 were nearly or fully formed, and I have no idea why they died just before hatching. But I have to believe it must have been something I did or didn't do with that last batch. So don't know. But at the moment, I have 14 American white breasts and 9 black copper Moran. I lost 3 of the breasts early on and 1 of the Morans. That last loss happened just a few days ago. That particular chicken, mostly you lose your chickens in the first day or two, but that particular one was hatched actually 6 days after the rest of the crew, and it was probably, I'm going to say 9 weeks old at this point, but it was maybe only 8 weeks old again, because it was 6 days early or later than the others. It was always smaller. I'd never seen an egg hatch that 6 days after the first ones began hatching. Or 6 days past the 21 days. That's a long wait for that last chicken. But anyway, a little over 2 weeks ago, it developed some kind of a disorder, and it couldn't really stand up. And the vet happened to be here that day, and she took a look at it and recommended antibiotics for a few days just to see how it would go. And so we got those. There are other reasons we might need those antibiotics. So now we have antibiotics for our chickens. So it seemed to help a little bit, but eventually the chick kind of succumbed to whatever the ailment was. The vet when she originally looked at it, didn't have a lot of information on chicken issues of this type. She said there are just too many variables without testing, and uh, chickens generally are not worth the cost of testing. So there you go. Sometimes they die. All right, so got those chickens going on. Now, let me talk about the dogs. There's a lot to talk about with the dogs. I'll try to keep it brief, but let me start with the current state of affairs, and then I'll go back and fill in the details of how we got here. Finn disappeared about 4 weeks ago and has not returned. And while he and Charlotte escaped a lot, Charlotte has always been back the next day, and Finn never more than 2 days. And we did have to go and fetch him like 3 different times. He seemed to get so far away that he did not know how to get home. So the bottom line is that Charlotte and Mac are now guarding the sheep. They seem to be doing well with that task. Charlotte still goes wherever she wants, whenever she wants, but she stays relatively close. And she grieved for about 2 weeks after Finn disappeared. I had her on a tether so she couldn't run away. But even after I let her loose, she was very quiet. And being a Great Pyrenees, she generally barks a lot. And there was nothing, literally nothing, for many days. And now she's back to barking up a storm. And speaking of storms, on the day that Finn disappeared, there was a storm, and Charlotte returned home almost immediately, just hours after they had escaped. And they had escaped maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon. This was like 6 or 7 in the evening, and she was back. And she's very scared of thunder. Still, after 7 months, she will not let me walk up to her to pet her. But if there is thunder, she's right there beside me looking for comfort, and I can pet her all I want in those moments. So she came back, but Finn didn't show up with her, and that's really not unusual. So let me back up and let's see if I can briefly describe the events or the circumstances of Finn's final escape. It started about 6 weeks ago. We were trying to get Charlotte and Finn to bond with the sheep, so we put all of them together in the front pastures. We already had been trying this for some time in the field next to the house, but we had to move the sheep. And we were able to contain the dogs in the field next to the house. After multiple escapes, we finally got it escape-proof. And so then it's like, well, we've got to move the sheep, though. So we moved them to the front field, and of course, they started escaping every day. We tried patching the places in the fence to keep them contained, and they still escaped nearly every day. And after an escape that had Scott going a few miles to pick up Finn, we put both of them back in the field right next to the house, and Finn was put on a tether. And Charlotte will stay close to him. So now we're like back to, what are we going to do? We spent long hours discussing what we were going to do, because just having to constantly chase them down and keep them in the fence just wasn't working. And in the meantime, we'd left the sheep in the front pasture, and within 3 days of the dogs being out of the pasture, we had a coyote attack, and we lost 6 of our 7 lambs and 1 of our ewes. So immediately we moved the rest of them. We moved them to the back field again where we had pulled them out. There wasn't really a whole lot of grass, but that was where we needed them to be with the dogs, where the dogs could protect them. So just 3 days alone, and the coyotes zeroed in on them, and we suffered, yet another huge emotional and financial loss. And it's far in the past now, and I'm over it. But as you can probably imagine, it was quite traumatic at the time. And again, I was questioning whether we wanted to even have sheep and goats. It was just beginning to be such a hassle. Well, I got over that bit of negativity, and we still have the sheep, and I've got a deposit on some goat kids. More on that later. So anyway, after lots and lots of research, I decided to try and train Charlotte and Finn with an e-collar, and it was recommended over and over again in the Livestock Guardian training group on Facebook. Well, no matter the e-collar system, though, it's an expensive and time-consuming undertaking, and we're talking months and months to get the system set up and to get them trained. And we were keeping Finn on the tether, and Charlotte always stayed with him. But what do we need to do about protecting the sheep? We just can't keep them in that same field forever. They have to be rotated from field to field for their health and the availability of the grass. And so the idea of fixing fences every day, every time we move them to another field or paddock, had already proven to be a completely unrealistic expectation. And the time to complete the e-collar fence and the training, again, I said it would months and months. So we decided to go back to an original plan. Before we got Finn and Charlotte, we had Mac, and Mac was to be the sheepdog. So we had kept Mac separate with the cows because he chased the sheep. He was pretty young then, and we didn't know what we were doing with teaching him how to bond with the sheep. And he bonded well with the cows, and we were preoccupied with trying to train Charlotte and Finn to guard the sheep. And all was well with Mac and the cows. Well, now that Finn and Charlotte, the plan with Finn and Charlotte with the sheep was scrapped, we decided to bring Mac back into the picture. And this was the fatal day that we lost Finn. So now that we decided to train Mac with the sheep, what was the plan to make that happen? And we needed to check the health of the flock after that coyote ordeal. So what we decided was we would bring them all together, the sheep and Mac. We would bring them all together in the corral. He could see us working with the sheep. And then we would bring all of them back out and put them in the field together. They had already been around enough. He wasn't really chasing them anymore, except to chase them away from his food. So anyway, that was the plan. And so we needed to move Finn and Charlotte out of the field. Again, that same field that we're always keeping the sheep in, that's close by, that we can watch closely with Mac and the sheep. So while we made this short jaunt up the travel lane to the corral, maybe a little bit of health check and back, we put Finn and Charlotte into the lower garden fenced area. And we'd held them there before and there was no problem. So we didn't take the time to move the tether. And by the time we returned with the sheep and Mac, only about 30 minutes later, I'm guessing that within 10 minutes, Finn and Charlotte had gotten into the orchard and then completely out of the perimeter fence. We could see where they had gotten out of the perimeter fence from the orchard. And never even saw them. We were down there, again, maybe 30 minutes that we walked down the travel lane, worked with the sheep, and then brought it back, and Finn and Charlotte were gone. Tomorrow will be 4 weeks. There's not much hope, but I still cling to just a little bit of hope. He has a collar that has our farm name and phone number clearly visible from 3 feet away. I can't imagine someone would try to steal him. I mean, how would they know that they needed to strongly contain him? I don't know. I guess they could have put him, if they had a really strong dog run, maybe they could have kept him. But anyway, he could have run afoul of a bear or that pack of coyotes. He could have been hit by a car, though we have found no evidence of that. Someone could have shot him. He could have gotten to the Primlin Resort. They have all sorts of bears and lions and who knows what else over there. It's an internationally known hunting resort. I just don't know. I just don't know. And that's the worst, not knowing. He could still be out there. There was 3 weeks ago, we had a call from a neighbor, someone who thought they had our dog. And I was so relieved. But then Scott goes over there and it wasn't our dog. It wasn't Finn. It was a Great Pyrenees dog that was extremely skinny and had some medical issues. And perhaps Finn is still out there somewhere like that, trying to survive. There is that small string tied to hope coming up again. So I'm going to move on. Let's talk about the remaining sheep and the one lamb. And they're doing really well. We moved forward with the plan for Matt guarding them. And then Charlotte was also in that same field. And I let her off the tether after only a few days. She was so despondent, I thought it was best. My instincts were correct for once in that situation. No more escaping. She stays pretty close, though she does roam around various places on the property. And I will eventually have to train her to stay within the perimeter. But she's starting to work with Mac, and I think Mac is beginning to bond with the sheep. And moving him out of the field next to the house has sealed that deal. Before that move, the sheep were with Mac and Charlotte in the same old field, but the calves were also in that field. And Mac immediately bonded with the calves. but not with the sheep. So moving the dogs and the sheep to a separate paddock from the calves seemed to have worked. Fingers crossed, so far it has worked. The sheep are still wary of actually both of the dogs, and it will likely take months and months for them to become comfortable, especially with Mac. I mentioned in a previous podcast he is food aggressive, and he's chased them away from his food multiple times. So that, again, they're wary of him. He can be pretty vicious with his growling. He's never tried to bite them, but he will growl at them. And we're working on a system where the dogs can have their food and the other animals cannot get to it. So the dogs can get in, get their food, and then get back out, but the other animals can't get in there to get to their food. So the sheep, you can easily chase them away, but eventually all the cows and sheep will be together, and the cows are not so easily chased away. And truly, the dogs should not have to fight for their food. So that's yet another work plan in progress. How do we fix up a special system? We've been on the internet looking at what other people do, and Scott's working on that today. All right, so the goats, I've gone back and forth about whether I want to bring goats back onto the homestead. And I already decided that I want Kiko goats just because they're strong resistance to parasites and they're minimal hoof maintenance. But these are very expensive goats. And when I say expensive, I mean very, very expensive. The kind of expense that would really hurt our finances. They would be probably they're not quite as expensive as a cow, but they're right up there. So I've put down a deposit on a trio of Kiko goats. It'll be late summer, fall, even next spring before we have these goats. It's a fairly local farm. There'll be 2 does and a buck as a starter herd. That's the plan. So it's not only is it imperative that the dogs begin guarding the sheep so I can feel confident they will also guard the goats, but more training will be needed so that the dogs don't harm the goats when they arrive. And again, thankfully, that's still quite a few months down the road. There should be plenty of time to get the dogs and sheep stabilized in their symbiotic relationship. And then adding the goats will be just a short training period with the goats in the next field over, where they can be seen by the dogs but not have any contact with them. And then after a few weeks, we would introduce them to the dogs with close supervision until we're comfortable that the dogs will accept them as part of the family. And so I'll do more on goats as that time gets closer. A little bit on the cows. Luna went to a new home. We sold Luna and she had a bull calf, and so we sold her and a bull calf to a lovely couple looking for a family milk cow that wasn't going to give them an overwhelming amount of milk. And Luna was perfect for them. She had quite a bit of Angus genetics, so she makes good offspring, are good for beef as well. And she also just doesn't make quite as much milk as the other cows. And they wanted the bull calf for breeding of they have some other Normandy cows as well. So it was a great fit, and I'm glad that we could rehome her so well. And so we rehomed Luna, and Cookie finally had her calf. So we're now milking 3 cows, Butter, Cookie, and Claire. I make cheese on Mondays, and the rest goes to the calves and fulfills the herd shares. And all's going well with the cows at the moment. Better knock on wood. But we started AI for spring 2023 calves. We want the birthing to begin happening in March. So the AI has already started. We did 8 cows. And by Monday, about 3 or 5 days from now, we will know whether we need to try again with any of these girls. If we see signs of any of them coming into heat again, we call the vet, and she will try again. And we also have a tentative plan to breed 1 or 2 in the fall so that we have milk year-round. So perhaps if only 1 or 2 do not take, we'll let 1 or 2 of those slide and try again in December for births in September of 2023. And there's always Cookie. She calved so late that she did not make it into the initial AI rotation. At the moment, she's already slated for a December artificial insemination for a September birth. And of course, we can still change our mind at any time right now until mid-July. AI can be done as late as mid-July for projected births no later than mid-April of 2023. There are always so many decisions to be made. And we never know whether we're making the right one. We just keep making decisions, keep moving. So I'll keep you up to date on how that AI goes. And then we have, I believe, 6 weeks after the initial AI, we can start doing pregnancy checks on them. All right, briefly, let me talk about the garden. Finally, the entire garden is planted. Yesterday, I put in the last of the winter squash and melon seeds. I planted the last 2 beds. We have 20 beds and 2 other long 2-foot by 70-foot strips that are all planted. Now, I may plant a few more flowers, but the veggie part is done. So I ended up with a lot more tomatoes than I had planned, and who knows what I'm going to do with them. I have 4 beds of baby lima beans that are looking good. The eggplant is going to be stellar this year, as is the chard. And the chard's pretty easy. But I must say, I am more than pleased with the eggplant. I haven't grown it in 4 or 5 years because of repeated failures. I had been given up on being able to raise that vegetable. And I'll say it again, these plants look fantastic. This could be the year of my success with eggplant. I also planted cucumber and summer squash, which is also a first for several years. They've never done well for me, and we shall see how they progress. It's too early to tell how they're going to do. We only transplanted my plant starts less than a week ago, and I see some of them are catching on, and time will tell. In the next week or two, they should really take off if they're going to. The onions look fantastic. I have cilantro, parsley, and peppers planted. The cilantro looks weak. That one, I keep trying, but I cannot say I've been successful with it yet. Another one that I keep trying, cilantro. No basil. I only started Thai basil, and I sold all of those plants at the farmer's market. I may have to buy a plant or 2 of sweet basil just to refresh my stock of dried basil. We shall see. Those are pretty easy to come by. Now the last few beds that I planted have winter squash and pumpkin. Some of those are from seed, which has not yet sprouted. Again, I just planted those seeds yesterday. Hope to see a jungle of plants out there in the next month, though. The winter squash and pumpkin make just giant green plants. So that's it for the garden. As far as the creamery, Scott and I, mostly Scott, are putting up the ceilings in the barn and milking parlor area, and he has finally gotten caught up on all of his other tasks, and he's moving forward with completing the creamery. As usual, we are behind schedule. But you know what? We will keep plugging along. It will get done, but on God's timeline and not ours. And that's really all I have to say about the creamery today. I hope to have lots of updates on this topic in the next podcast. So let's just get on to the topic of the day, raising animal protein. We have lots of resources that I've already talked about. As you can tell, there are always challenges. And no matter how well you think you've laid out your plan, and every day brings new decisions that you never knew you'd have to make, no matter how educated or prepared you think you are, just know that every day is a learning experience. You will never get it done, settled, never to change. It's always going to change. But let's talk about what some of the options are and some of the things you'll want to think about when you're making your choices about which animal protein that you want to raise on your farm. So, small or large to start? Well, unless you have previous experience with large animals, cows may not be your first go-to animal for raising protein. My suggestion is to start with something smaller. Sheep and goats are smaller, but even smaller than that are chickens. Chickens are always a great place for anyone to start. We started in 2006. Chickens were the first thing that we had. Comparatively, they are easy. In many places, you can raise chickens in your backyard. Now, if you have an HOA, maybe not. You may have to forego the chickens, but there are other options. I'll talk about some of those in a moment. The thing to keep in mind with chickens is whether you're looking for egg or meat protein, or both. If you're looking for both, check out dual-purpose bird. Just look for dual-purpose birds and go from there. There are hundreds and hundreds of chicken breeds, so you want to narrow them down as much as you possibly can. And there are many other factors to take into consideration, but this one, in my opinion, is the most important. Do you want eggs or meat or both? And you'll even get into some dual-purpose birds will produce bigger birds, and other dual-purpose breeds will produce a nice size bird but will produce more eggs. Now, you don't want to get too caught up in exotic chickens, really cool looking chickens or ones that produce really cool looking eggs, but they don't produce the meat and eggs you require for your family. And many of the exotic looking chickens can provide exactly what you need. It's just important to check the statistics regarding the finished size of the bird and or expected number of eggs per year. Some may be as little as 150 eggs per year, while others may produce twice as much, maybe nearly 300 eggs a year for some of them that are just egg layers. And generally, the more eggs, the less body size, and vice versa. More body size can produce significantly fewer eggs. It's not 100% true, but it's kind of a good rule of thumb. And you can always rely on the published statistics for your chosen breed. Oh, and while you may not buy from Stromberg's or McMurray's, those are the two biggest outfits that I know where you can have chicks shipped to you. They have hundreds and hundreds of different breeds. They are a great resource for comparing those breeds one to another. Again, because they have all of the breeds in one area, you can kind of flip through their magazine and compare, which one produces this number of eggs and how big how much does the grown chicken weigh. So all of that stuff is available. Again, that Stromberg's and McMurray's are the two big live chick houses. They ship you live 1-day-old chicks. Let's see. So all of that's going to help in you making your decision, and then after that, you can choose who and where you want to get the chicks for your enterprise. Now, once you've chosen your breed, the internet in general is your resource for details. Search engines are amazing for providing answers to specific questions. Like just today, I looked up the age at which my chickens should start laying. For the breasts, it can be as early as 4 months old, while the Morans can be as late as 6 months old. So I didn't really consider that in my decision for which breed to choose, but it may be an important stat for you. But I needed to know after I decided that, and I hatched my eggs. When can I expect to be getting? I need to be ready for them to start laying eggs, and when should I start looking for that? So so you're looking how quickly can you begin to get eggs, which breeds may have health issues. Are there any climate issues to consider based on where you live in the country? Like this one's not very tolerant to heat or that one to cold and so on. So choose your breed, but then read up on it to make sure it will be a good fit for you. And as always, you may make a mistake and need to start again. No problem. You won't be able to think of every single question and get every choice correct the first time. As I said, every day is a learning experience. Now, you may also consider ducks, though often I think we keep ducks just because they're cute and not so much for meat. Uh, Having said that, they do produce good meat and they come with their own set of challenges related to water. And I don't have any experience and I can't provide much more information than that. They always seem like more trouble than they're worth, and your mileage may vary. So look somewhere else for information on ducks. I don't have that. I'm also allergic to duck eggs, so that's another reason I don't have the ducks. But duck eggs, a lot of people really, really like duck eggs. So let me just kind of amend that. Ducks are a good thing to consider. But you got to have water. All right, now some other small animals to consider are rabbits and quail. Now both of these can be grown in the smallest of environments. And an HOA will likely not even know you have them as long as you keep the manure cleaned up regularly. Both rabbits and quail are going to produce a lot of odors from excrement. Out here, I can get away with any amount of odor that I can stand. But in an apartment or an HOA subdivision, you will need to find ways to dispose of the manure, likely on a daily basis. And as with all animals, there is learning to be done. But both of these animals are relatively easy to raise. You've heard me talk a lot about the quail. I don't have experience as an adult with rabbits. We had rabbits when I was a child, but they're pretty easy to keep, as far as I can tell. So, and again, you can keep them in a small area, and also if you've got larger acreage, of course, you'll do with them well with them also. Now, goats and sheep are the next largest up the scale for protein animals. And also, both of them can give you milk as well. So obviously, you need some land for this. I can't imagine any HOA allowing grazing animals in your yard. But you also don't need a huge amount of acreage for just a few sheep or goats. You will need fencing. If you keep them close to you, a family dog can often provide deterrence to predators such as other dogs and a coyote or two. So an acre or two right out your back door of good pasture will suffice for anywhere 1 to 5 goats, a couple of acres, and you could have 5 goats and or sheep. Of course, it depends on where you live, about how much grass is going to grow on 2 to 5 acres, how much rain do you get, and so on. But supplementing with hay is always an option, and if you don't have the grazing space, and you'll likely need hay even if you have the acreage. So they're pretty easy animals to raise. There is some learning curve there, but just a few acres, and you can have goats and or sheep. Next up would be pigs. We haven't given these guys a try yet, but it's only a matter of time. We're learning a lot. We'll be ready probably by fall or spring to move into the pig area. We've been so focused on the cows, sheep, and goats, we simply haven't had the time to get this enterprise started. And of course, the creamery. Now, you can also keep one pig in a relatively small area. I mean, a really small area. Like if you had 1 acre, you could fence off a little area and just feed the pig in that area. Give them a mud hole and a place to have water and food, and they'd do just fine. Pigs are generally friendly and easy to work with from everything that I've seen. And of course, it depends on the particular animal, the breed, and the particular animal. You can end up with a mean or unruly animal, just like humans. There are all kinds of personalities out there. So you might want to visit the farm where you plan to purchase your pigs and see that how the owners interact with them. Is the breed you're considering a docile breed? Do some research. Will it do well on pasture, or do you need to keep it confined? Some breeds require some confinement and lots of feed to live and grow that they won't grow on pasture. So it depends again on what you're looking for your operation, how much space you have. If you have woods, you have a great environment for raising pigs more naturally. And this is another animal with which I have no experience, so I'm not going to say more here. Just listing it as an option for animal protein sources. Everything that I've seen says it's a pretty easy, mid-sized kind of animal to raise. Now, if you are into the big animals, you're ready to start with some cows, or even bison might be a good choice for you. Uh, Even with a cow, you can get by on a couple of acres if you're only going to have 1 cow, like you're just going to buy a steer to raise or something like that. You'll need more or less hay according to where you live. And as an aside, all of this info that I'm giving in this podcast is for the U.S. I haven't said that, but I am definitely not your resource for anywhere outside the continental U.S. I don't have any info on raising bison, but there are plenty of them available out in the Oklahoma and Texas areas. Are a couple places I know that I've seen them. They're a big, scary animal, but it's definitely doable. Arms Family Homestead has info on bison if you're interested in that. But again, the cows, you're going to need a couple of acres usually, or access to a lot of hay. And then you can, raise up your cow. You can raise them on hay, and that's the equivalent of grass fed. That's dry grass, basically. Now, as far as beef, one butchered cow is going to provide protein for at least a family of 4 for a year. A year. And it depends on it depends on how much meat your family consumes, actually. And that in turn is going to depend on the ages of your children. A couple of teenagers and you need the whole cow, maybe. If your children are younger, you might only need a half cow. And you'll need to factor in what other animal protein sources that you have chosen to raise. And now that I'm on that subject, let me give you our stats, and then you can kind of perhaps scale it up for you and your up or down for you and your family, especially if you've already decided what you're going to grow. We have a huge variety, but your situation will be unique to you. If you can have the huge variety, which we do, we plan for as much as a quarter cow, a half pig, a lamb, and a goat. Quarter cow, half a pig, lamb, and a goat. And that amount kind of changes depending on which animals we have available at any given time. But if all things were equal, That is what I plan for the two of us for a year's worth of animal protein. And add to that lots and lots and lots and lots of eggs from the chickens. And as far as chicken meat, I don't have a very good idea of how much we consume, actually. Unfortunately, I've been buying them at the grocery store at irregular times. Usually when I'm shopping and think, gee, I haven't had chicken in a while, and then I buy one of those rotisserie ones. And all of that is coming to an end soon, thank God. At the moment, we don't eat a lot of chicken simply because it requires that trip to town. But obviously, we have chickens now. I'll be raising some for meat birds as well as for the eggs. So I'll have my dozen hens that are laying, but I'll also capture their eggs. They're dual purpose, so I can capture their eggs and hatch out, however many I need to for meat. Now, I've heard others plan the number of meat chickens from one a week to one a month. So there are 52 weeks in the year and 12 months. So your needs will fall in there somewhere. All of that has to change, of course. If chickens and rabbits are your main source of animal protein, you might need two a week or some other number. I don't know. It depends. If you've only got chicken or you've only got rabbits, you're going to need a lot more than what I just gave you there. So make your best guess and then adjust each year as you narrow those numbers down for your changing family situation. And because you're just learning about them, start small and then work up to how many you think you need. Your plans are going to change as you learn and as you gain more and more experience. All right, that's it for today's podcast. I'm changing my schedule to make it easier for me to publish podcasts more often. There's always so much going on, and the animals and gardens have first priority. And of course, getting that creamery up and running is high, high, high on our priority list. And we'll get there eventually. But in the meantime, I'm assessing how I use my time and opening up more opportunities to share our homestead updates and a little bit of wisdom on how you might get started. God willing, I think I've given you enough basics on animal protein sources to get you started. Shoot me an email with any questions that you have about getting started with growing your own animal protein for food. I'm always happy to take a few moments to respond. Tell me what you're trying to accomplish, and I will try and provide some guidance, or at the very least, point you in the direction of where you can find more information. So you can email me, Melanie@peacefulheartfarm.com. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please hop over to Apple Podcasts or whatever podcasting service you use. Subscribe. Please subscribe. And give me a 5-star rating and a review. It really helps with the algorithms. And if you like this type of content and want to help out the show, the absolute best way you can do that is to share it on all of your social media platforms. Share it with your friends or family, any of them who might be interested in this type of content. Let them know about the Peaceful Heart FarmCast. Thank you so much for stopping by the homestead. And until next time, may God fill your life with grace and peace.